Oh, we're live. That's great. Hello there. I'm Martin Cross. This is Cross's Corner, and with me is Camilla Hadland Horrocks. Hi, Camilla.
Hey, Crossy, great to see you.
And we are here. It's still Christmas, so happy Christmas or happy New Year if you're watching this later on in the week. But we are here to review the 2022 season, and what a season it was. Amazing things to talk about. We were chatting about our highlights just before we came on air, Camilla, and you mentioned one of your highlights, which I'm sure we'll get to through the chat. But what was it?
I think for me, but on the international scene, the most impressive thing I saw was the Dutch men's eight rowing back at the European Championships from a crab that they caught, a boat stopping full crab that put them a few lengths of clear water behind in the first 150 and coming back to get a silver medal that they then went on to sort of replicate at the World Championships as well and pick up a medal too. So it was a good sign of things to
Yeah,
come.
I couldn't believe that race. It was really interesting actually because I was doing commentary with Greg Searle, and um, and they just completely dropped off the radar. And you saw in terms of the speed, and then he just happened to look at the boat speed. I think coming into the last 500 meters, and he was going, look at the Dutch there. Look at their boat speed, and it was like phenomenal compared to the British who'd been out in front, and that was just amazing, really, to see that. And then I think it was that night we were out at a kind of, I don't know if you were there. There was a world rowing thing at the Munich Olympic Stadium,
Yes,
and
yes, I remember that. That was amazing, wasn't it? There were the
yeah,
practice event for the athletics that we got to watch.
yeah, and the thing is, the Dutch eight all kind of went in there en masse with their coach Diedrich Simon, free drinks and all the rest of it, because they were just like cock a hoop. So that was a sensational thing. I, there's lots of highlight. I think for me, another race at the Europeans that was just sensational. And I think probably gave me, in terms of why it was important, and the actual race itself, was the men's singles.
Totally. And that kind of that big story about Ollie Zeidler and the sort of history behind why that race was so important to him, a home championships, Munich having not hosted a rowing event for near on 10 years, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Since
yeah.
the sort of early 2010s. And the pressure on that man's shoulders must have been immense. And the kind of story of the final really told that as well, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think what was interesting for me, I know he didn't do so well in the final of the Worlds, but Ntuskos was just, people wondered what he'd be like in a bit of a headwind condition, and he was out there really showing his pace, the Olympic champion. And that duel between Zeidler and Ntuskos, and then I don't know whether Zeidler had COVID after Henley. Was there some? He missed Lucerne, didn't he?
Definitely ill. I'm not sure whether it was COVID specifically, but yeah, I think I'd heard that he'd gotten ill
Yeah,
after coming over to race at Henley.
whether that told, and just the excitement of him basically stopping, but already Melvin Tweller, this new kind of Dutch sculler that has come through, single sculler, coming through to take the medal. And then that was so exciting, but then you had all the swimmers from the Dutch team, and there were quite a few from the Dutch team, I think, just jumped in the water and just swam out to greet him,
They
which
were
was,
busy, weren't they? Because they had Caroline Florijn as well. So there's plenty of Dutch swimming going on at the European Championships, and amazing, kind of just on that topic and stepping back, the Dutch have had a sort of, I would say, not an outstanding year, right? We'll go on to talk about some of the international programs that have had an outstanding year, like the British, I think we have to mention, and there are a couple of others, and those that maybe haven't had such an outstanding year. And again, we can talk about that. But I think they're in a really good position across the boards. Loads and loads of silvers and bronzes, and two really strong single scullers on both sides of the program. When do you ever see that, right? Two medal worthy single scullers, both men's and women's. It's very rare, isn't it, to have that kind of strength in the singles?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because they've got a new chief coach, that's Ilko Meerhorst, who coached the quad with Diederik Simon in the Olympics, that fantastic Dutch quad in Tokyo. And I think they're doing a lot of long, low intensity work. The men and women are kind of together as squads. And I was listening to Caroline Florine on the Row Show. She was on Crossy's Corner earlier, but she was good interview on the Row Show, and she was basically saying how they're all in singles early on in the season. So and out of that singles racing, you got the sort of Florine emerging and Twella emerging. So they hadn't been in the bigger boats in the early season, and it is remarkable that the Netherlands have got those two performers.
Yeah, and I think it's also backed up by good medals in the bigger boats as well. They're not just that single power and speed isn't just coming in the small boats. Yes, they did have great medals in the women's pair. You've got to remember that they stepped up really well to get onto the podium behind the Kiwis in that event. And you've also got some of the other kind of, obviously the Dutch double from last year at the Olympic Games that contained Twela. I'm sure we'll see kind of back in a new form combination. But then the big boats as well, both the men's and women's quads medalled, the Dutch men's and women's eights medalled, all silvers and bronzes. But I think that's a really good place to be in going into qualification year, and just a few little adjustments, we'll see a lot of those turn into golds, I'm sure.
Yeah, and while we're on the Dutch, we should mention that was a beautiful tweet that we were sent by Rogier Blink, the Dutch former Dutch rower from the Olympics, and his partner Marloes Oldenburg, who won silver in the fours in the World Championships. I think she was rowing bow in that four, and then had a horrific bicycle accident. I think they were off road, and it was really horrendous, the accident that she had. And it looked like, maybe it was a season-ending injury. And somehow she has recovered from it and got back in the boat. And Rogier said, even better than the silver medal was the present to see Marloes back in the boat, which is a great way to end the 22 season for that rowing couple.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see her back, because I think it looked like a terrible injury. I'd seen some of the pictures of her in hospital with her neck brace on, and horrific cycling crash, and something like you say that could be career ending. So she must have worked so hard to be back in a position to be out sculling in a single. That lovely video that Rahir sent us, so thank you, Rahir, for that. Hopefully we'll see Marloes back in 2023 and beyond on the run up to Paris. So which is just around the corner. And I know we're doing a 2022 wrap, but 2023 is a big year, and it seems to have just sprung upon us, this Olympic qualification year, out of nowhere. It's mad.
It is mad. Well, let's take a look back at the start of the year in terms of things that happened early on in the year. I'm thinking back to the World Indoor Ergometer Championships, and for me that was noteworthy because I think events obviously in the Ukraine have dominated the news, and also international sport with no teams from Russia and Belarus. But that was the last occasion, I think, in 2022 where there was I think it was Vyazovkin.
Yeah, absolutely right. Vyazovkin went up against Ward Lemelin at those indoor champs, both really big, powerful, very capable athletes going sort of around the 5:40 mark when it comes to a 2K. And that it's really important that you've mentioned the sort of war in Ukraine, Crossy, that weekend I think was as things were erupting. That was the weekend that World Rowing issued their statement on athletes competing from Ukraine at the World Virtual Indoor Championships. There were lots of athletes that weren't able to compete because they were, having to move from their homes, and so it was really well. I guess it was really well publicized that was all happening through the event when it was going on. So yeah, it's a pretty pinnacle moment, I guess, that it was the last sort of Russian competitor that took part in a world rowing event was in February.
And then, of course, we had the world rowing community come together to support Ukrainian refugees. I know Jack Bowman, of course, the British Olympic silver medalist from Tokyo in the quad sculls. I think him and his family took in former Ukrainian oarswoman and oarsman or sculler into their house. The name will come to me soon, but I think the rowing community as such really pulled together in 2022 to support the Ukrainian team. I think the men's team, did they go to Bulgaria? The para team, they were training in Nantes, I think, with the French. All those facilities being made available.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the Ukrainian team were on training camp at the time, right?
Yeah.
When things broke out, and so it was great that they were able to stay where they were. I know the Ukrainian lightweight double were also training, I think, somewhere. I want to say like Portugal or somewhere a bit sunnier, and they were able to stay there whilst things continued to develop. So, yeah, it's been a sort of it's been a big year for people stepping up and supporting within their own community, and a big shout out, I guess, to all of those that were able to support it and continue to support, right? Because it's by no means over yet.
And just while we're on it, I mean, the Ukrainians had some fantastic results at the World Rowing Championships. I think in the para events, we'll talk about that. I think, did their lightweight men's double pick up a bronze in the lightweight men's double final of the World Championships?
That's a really good question. I think they did quite well at the Europeans as well, and it's just trying to
Yeah,
cast your mind back, isn't it, to to each of these events, which seems so long ago. But
yeah.
they definitely did very well at the European Championships. They made the A final at the Europeans. They finished sixth. I'm not sure about the Worlds, Crossy. Do you remember where they finished there?
I think they might have got a medal at the Worlds. I think it was a real
I'm
turn
just
up.
going to have a quick
I
look,
could
actually.
kind of remember them in lane 5 or lane 6.
You're absolutely right. They got picked up a bronze behind the Italians and the Irish.
There
So
we
yeah,
go.
really
Yeah.
great result, especially beating out Switzerland, who I think had been sort of pitted as
Oh,
the
yeah.
third option for that those medal contenders. So
Yes.
amazing to see from Kovalov and Kamara. Amazing.
Yes. And then if we go back through the year, we kind of had around March time, we always get it at the boat race. But it was particularly noteworthy this year, I think, because of the standard of the crews.
Yeah, I mean, a post-Olympic year boat race is something that I think it, it just brings out all of those people that want to do something a little bit different, that perhaps don't feel like rowing's quite over for them yet. So again, I think a great example is someone like Grace Prendergast, right, who's continued her season through with the sport of doing her degree at Cambridge, but also ticking off the boat race is something pretty unique. And yeah, I mean, that was across the board, whether it was athletes that were coming out of rowing, so Grace or Barnaby Delars, for instance, or athletes that were then looking to use it as a vehicle to step through to Paris. So Roman Worsley or Tom George or Ollie Wynne Griffith, all of those guys that continued on and are back in their programs, having done something pretty special. And yeah, I can't remember. I think we were saying this on the run up to the boat race in some of our previews, Crossy, that I cannot remember the last time there was a boat race with that kind of quality of athlete in. Maybe 2013. I'm thinking back to like the Stan Lodis days,
Yeah.
where there were Jamie and Ollie Cook racing, and in the Oxford crew. Those kind of years maybe was the last time we'd seen something of that quality.
Yeah, I did say in a bit of punditry on the day, I thought that might have been the best ever crew. I mean, there'll always be debates when they're about the best ever crew in the boat race. But I think the quality of the Cambridge crew, they essentially had that boat stacked, and for the Oxford men to dominate them, and then the Oxford women, I think they broke the record. I'm trying to remember what time I did it off the top of my head. I can't really remember, but it kind of opened the year of Imogen Grant to an extent, because she stroked that crew, and she's obviously a fixture through the season, doing her medical stuff at the same time as rowing for Cambridge, and then stroking that, and then coming through in the women's lightweight singles to break the world record in Lucerne, getting back in the double with Emily Craig, and winning the world title in a stacked field.
Yeah, I mean, it is just one of the most kind of gobsmacking years, I guess, for one athlete to achieve so much. And again, I think to come away from having won the boat race in the style that you have while stroking and doing all your studies, but not only to perform at the world championships well, but to win the world championships, it's almost in a small boat, and again, I appreciate that there are kind of some of the guys, although in saying that, thinking about on the men's side, Tom and Ollie in the pair only picking up that bronze, which I think there was a bit of disappointment from that. But the likes of Imogen Grant and Grace Prendergast being able to go away and win a world championship after winning a boat race, but then sticking something like a medical degree on top. It's amazing. Like I could barely even get my head around doing a degree at Cambridge in medicine, let alone everything else that comes with the training and the focus to win a championship in that stacked field. And for the Italian, going to that final, actually, that was one of the big surprises, I guess, of the year, was the Italians, blowing up and missing out in that lightweight women's double final.
I know. And the Irish getting through the French silver medalists to win a bronze medal. Pretty much on the line, the two rowers from Skibbereen Rowing Club. Actually, that's one of my highlights of 2022. Skibbereen invited me over to the west of Ireland, which was great. And Dominic Casey, the coach of the Irish lightweight men's double, looked after us. And we did the sort of Skibbereen gala dinner, their 50th anniversary. It was great. And of course, we can talk about O'Donovan and McCarthy in the lightweight men's double scull. Let's leave that till later. But really interested, Imogen Grant, and mustn't forget she got to the final of the Henley women's single sculls as well, just losing out to Cara Colo, which for a lightweight rower. I know there are a few withdrawals, COVID-wise. Emma Twigg dropped out of Henley, didn't she? But it was still a remarkable season for her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, and still only on the way up, right? Rowing careers are long, as so long as you're enjoying it and you want to do it, which is a big part of that partnership, right? Of her and Emily Craig, that won that world championship. A lot of it is just about enjoyment and enjoying the process, and a lot of the interviews that they've done around that and beyond have been about enjoyment, enjoying rowing, enjoying what you're doing, and not looking back on that fourth place result at Tokyo and beating yourself up about it. They've both been very honest to say, actually, it was really enjoyable. we've learned a lot. We've come away and learnt loads, and this has been great. So, yeah, I think that's
Yeah, and just a
amazing.
shout out for Emily Craig as well. I mean, she had a really difficult time early on in the season. There were questions about funding. I think it was all due to that, terrible incident that happened with her dog, and in the Tokyo year that was still going on, and she really battled through that. And of course, she won. Was it with Maddie Arlett? She won the double sculls through the season without Imogen Grant. So big shout out for Emily Craig as well. So we come through to the first of the World Cup regattas in Belgrade, which kind of had a bit of a pointer that this was going to be an interesting season, and things were, potentially going to be a little bit different, I think.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of those kind of newcomers to the scene were around, and we've already talked about the Dutch. That was where we first kind of saw
Yeah,
the Dutch on both sides. Twela giving Zeidler a run for his money, and Zeidler just hanging on for that gold medal. But yeah, it all worked out for Caroline Florine on the women's side of things. I'm just trying to think about some of the other big performances that we saw. We had a notable absence of a couple of teams, I think, at World Cup 1, which is I guess fairly usual, right? You've got to pick and choose where you decide to come. The Dutch didn't come to World Cup 3, for instance. The Romanians weren't at World Cup 1.
yeah,
Obviously, we don't see many of the kind of Antipodean or like North American squads at World Cup 1 too. So it was a big kind of, I guess, indicator for a lot of the European sides. But yeah, with lots of notable absences. Although China did come to World Cup 1 and performed really well, and I think that's where a few of the disappointing performances. So take note, the men's quad, right? I think a lot of people saw the men's quad perform at World Cup 1 and at Henley and thought, oh, the Chinese men's quad's on the way up and they could be real serious medal contenders. But then, lots of other kind of switch arounds from the likes of like Poland, the Dutch, Lithuania, Ukraine, etc. All then kind of came to the fore, and the British, of course, in that men's quad event.
Well, the British, now you mention the British, I think one of the most remarkable things was about the British, because I seem to recall in Belgrade, the British didn't make the final. They were in the B final, so the top 6, and we've already mentioned, the Italians weren't there. There are a number of crews that weren't in Belgrade. And one of the stories of the season, I think, was what happened with the British quad in between. Belgrade, they were off the pace. I think Jack Bowman tweeted, I couldn't remember, but I think he's tweeted that the British quad came last in Lucerne.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that might be correct. And look, I know that again, Lucerne was one of those events that was sort of plagued with COVID through a number of squads. So I know there are many reasons why a crew may underperform, but it is a really remarkable turnaround. And lots of different personnel, right? For a crew to come together in such limited time between Lucerne and the Worlds and the Europeans with 2 brand new athletes on board in George Bourne and Matt Hayward.
yeah,
I think that was a really good sign of things to come if that continues to stay together as a combination.
yeah, and I think it's good. Paul Stannard is obviously taking over the Jurgen Grobler role as men's chief coach, but he's also coaching directly the men's quad. So for him, it was interesting, really, that the quad didn't have speed early in the season, but then obviously under his stewardship, they got back their mojo.
Yeah.
And they weren't that far off the Polish in the Worlds. So another thing I remember in Belgrade was it was the first time we saw the Sinkovic brothers back in the double scull. And they're obviously going to do, trying to do the double scull, the pair, and the double scull in terms of Olympic gold medals. But maybe a sign that things weren't quite right with them. I know they won again in Poznan, but in Belgrade, the Polish led them, really. and it took the most almighty sprint from the Sinkovics to drag themselves through the Polish to just win in Belgrade. And you kind of thought, oh, well, maybe they're unfit or.
Yeah, I think I think the Polish, actually, talking of squads that have had a great season, I think I really want to call out the Polish men's sculling squad, because every event that they turned up to this year, they had a different combination of that quad and that double scull, and whether it was, including the likes of Ditarski and Baranski, which it was, I think, at the first World Cup, and then there was the sort of old I say the old combination, the combination that it of Bishkop and
Yeah,
the I've forgotten who the other person is in that combination now. But the whatever event they turned up to, that all got shuffled around, and they did extremely well across the board. And they've then produced a world championship winning quadruple scull at the end of the season. So yeah, I just think a big shout out to Poland anyway, for being in line for that. But yeah, the Croatians, difficult to cling on, I guess, to that legacy that the double had, because it's such a long time ago, right? The Rio
yeah,
Olympiad now is near on 6-7 years ago, the start of that, and or even further behind, actually, and to jump back into a boat type where you've got such pedigree, and you're the person that everyone's going for, of course, you're really vulnerable to programs focusing on that. And by the end of the season, right, obviously the French were able to cling on to their title.
yeah,
The Croatians were completely off the podium. But newcomers such as Spain and Australia to that event, getting onto the World Championship podium, who we didn't even see at Belgrade, I don't think, or maybe we saw the Spanish, but
yeah. I think we might have seen the Spanish, but yeah. Um, and I would like to shout out. I think in terms of there's a lot of sporting behaviour in terms of rowing. I think we're very fortunate as a sport the way that our athletes relate to each other. But I think the way that the Sinkovics handled the fourth place and have done in terms of social media and all the rest of it, I mean, I think was a sign of what great athletes they are, because it was a shock those two not getting a medal at the World Championships, but I think they handled themselves really well.
yeah, and I think given that that they are very socially present, they've got loads of social media, they're always kind of engaging with the rowing community. I have no doubts that they're going to go away and be posting lots of training videos of them continuing to work. I don't think this will be a sort of I don't think this will lead to more disappointment. I think they'll use it as a really good springboard into coming back, right? And I know that they had maybe a handful, maybe that's a bit too much actually, of disappointing races in the pair within the Tokyo Olympiad. The European Championships springs to mind in Poznan. I think that there was some illness and they finished way down in the C final. I think, I'm not sure
Mm,
if it was that event or one of the events that season. And then they use that to kind of move on and continue into its success in Tokyo. So look, I think let's not write them off just yet. Great, obviously, to see some new names on the podium come September at the Worlds. But yeah, I think that first World Cup was both a sign that maybe the Croatians weren't quite going to be as strong as we thought they might, but also, Spain picking up a bronze medal, a nice early sign that combination of Garcia Pujola and Conde Romero were
yeah,
going to be
yeah.
really strong.
Moving on from World Cups, I think, and maybe we can, the Poznan World Cup, the first time we saw the Antipodeans, there was a couple of Americans. I think one of the American scullers got a bronze medal, I seem to recall, in Poznan. We saw the Kiwi pair, the new pair of McIntosh and McDonald take a win there. And then the German eights racing the Australians, and it was interesting. I think I kind of said in commentary, oh, it looks like they've never been away, because they were right out there in front of the field, and they won that World Cup event. But given what's happened to German rowing since, Um,
Yeah, it's a big topic, isn't it? Because I think there's been, again, lots of uh, lots of media articles that have been coming from both within the team, via social media, and from athletes speaking up about their experience of being within the system, within the German rowing team, but also national press articles, right, that came off the back of the Europeans, especially about the Germans' performance across the board. But it's I think, looking from the outside, right, that German men's eight, it it just is completely and utterly, like, ripped to shreds from what it was in Tokyo, and
mm.
how we can expect them to be performing at the same level with almost an entirely different crew. They're at the start of a cycle, really, with athletes, with no layers. They're almost at the point that the British were at on the run into Tokyo, right? With an entirely new set of athletes that we might see back. Maybe it'll be
So,
Paris, but
yeah,
beyond to LA.
well, I think that's absolutely right. And they did lose two of their Olympians, I think, after the Europeans, was it, and the World Championships, because they had kind of police exams or something that they were doing that they couldn't do the World Championships. But I think to compare, if you take, for example, the British team, take, for example, the men's four, who obviously won brilliantly in Richiche, they they were all first time world championship um, rowers,
Mm,
and they could come into the team and produce a result like that. But what Germany didn't have was the ability to pick up, you know, from the under 23 setup, rowers to come into the A to at least be competitive in the A final. And so one of the things with the German system is that they don't have that talent pipeline coming through. In a way, I think maybe some like the American eight, they have, they have some good under 23s coming through, and Germany just don't seem to have that.
yeah, and I think that German eight, you're right, did race at the under 23s, and I don't think they even medaled, if I'm right, Crossy. I could be wrong, because I wasn't at the under 23s, but I seem to remember looking at it in preparation for commentary at the Europeans, that the majority of them had been in the system, and not even managed to, or at this point, I don't even know if the under 23s had happened. Yes, it would have done, because it would have been July.
Mm.
And I think if you look across the board, across all the squads and programs, in order to step up to that senior level and be successful, even the gold medalists from the under 23s in any given year take a few years to
Yeah.
really come into their own at senior level. So if you're not even on the podium at under 23s now, I'm not saying it's a direct correlation for success, or that automatically you have to have medaled at under 23s to be any good at senior level, because we've been proven time and time again that isn't necessarily the case. But as a sort of full unit to step up almost, it's a fairly good indicator, right? That I think you need to be at least in the kind of top couple at under 23 if you stand any chance of making the podium at senior.
Yeah, and then moving on from Poznan, I think we could go to Henley, or maybe just I thought actually a brief mention of the two American crews at the IRAs and the NCAAs. I think it was Texas. Did they win again at the NCAAs? I hope I got that right. But I know that Cal, with under their coach Scott Franston, won the IRAs with that big Italian guy, Gennaro Di Mero, the Italian single sculler from Tokyo in the Cal Aids.
Mm.
So I just kind of wanted to point that out. And another thing about the American system, which is a lot of those British athletes, and we need to talk about the British results, had been to American universities. And it is, in a way, that the American universities have provided for Britain and other nations a real sort of development opportunity for those athletes to come good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not just the British, but like you say, the Italian team have got a number of athletes that row within the program, like the various programs in the US. So just thinking off the top of my head, the likes of like Valentina Seppi, yeah, you've mentioned Gennaro Damaro. You think about again a lot of the I think especially a lot of the Europeans, the Greeks, Kiridou,
Yeah.
Aneta Kiridou, they all again row over in the States. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of up and coming talent that has been nurtured really well by the American collegiate system. And potentially within the Tokyo years, it was a detriment to the US's own talent being developed, because you think about the amount of eights that the crews can make. Sorry, the amount of eights that the universities can make out of athletes that aren't American, aren't eligible to row for the US, and it maybe is hindering some of their own homegrown
Yeah.
talent to step up into the senior teams. Now, the US picked up a medal at the World Championships this year in the lightweight women's double scull, but how much can you pin that on the success of collegiate rowing in the US? I'm not
Yeah.
terribly sure you can, right? Whereas the big sweep boats, I think there is a bit more of a direct link there, and they're not performing so well. So yeah, I think it's great for the European nations that they can send people to get really strong and fit within the US programs, but it potentially is coming at a bit of a detriment to the US sweep team.
Henley, we were both working at Henley commentary. New 6-day regatta, which was obviously a fantastic innovation. I think the place was buzzing post-COVID with loads of entries. And there were a few highlights I think we could pick out from the regatta.
Definitely not the weather. I don't think the weather was a highlight this year, especially the Saturday semi-finals day. I mean, it was quite remarkable, wasn't it, watching some of those races come down in, I think we described it on the commentary as biblical rain, on the Saturday afternoon. It was so heavy, like nothing I'd ever seen before. But yeah, other than the weather, lots of highlights.
Yeah, Windsor boys A and B crews contesting the final of the Fawley, the boys quadruple sculls. A great credit to their coach. Is it Mark Wilkinson?
Yeah, Mark.
And that lad in there, who's the lad?
Marcus Shute.
Marcus Shute, that's right. Who's now, I think he's off at Princeton or somewhere, Harvard or somewhere like that. To do his studies, but what an achievement that was. A great race in the final of the men's fours, where the Australians, who I think had won in Poznan, came back and they won, 3 of their Olympic 4, and they won by just 1 foot from the British. To me, I think that was the closest verdict we had in the finals. What
Yeah,
else? What else stood out for you?
I think we had a few really good semi-finals. I'm just trying to think. One that sprang to mind was the new University Women's Eights event, UL
Oh
going up
yeah,
against Yale, um, in that, which I thought was the Island Challenge Cup for University Women's Eights. Great to see the Americans coming over for that, and I hope that we'll see more and more international interest in the island, because it made it awesome. Yale versus Brown in the final again, like, you love to see it. I'm just trying to think of some of the other really close races that we had. Great, and so many international finals as well. The Americans versus the Australians in the finals of the women's double sculls
yeah,
and the Stoner. Anything else that's standing out? Oh, the women's eights you were talking about, Crossy, before we
yeah,
came live in the Remenham. That was a great surprise.
yeah. I thought, yeah, it was great to see them, bung the women in his top crew together, and then they were down against the Australians, and the Australians had their 4 in the 8. I seem to recall, so it was a stacked sort of on both sides. But the British rode through the Australians to win. I thought that was a real highlight. And then it was the first girls' eights, was it? I can't remember the name. Is it the
The
Prince
Prince
Philip
Philip.
Cup? The Prince
Yeah, I think
Philip.
was it the second year of the Prince Philip, or was it the
Oh, was
first
it the
year?
second? I can't remember. Maybe it was the second year.
Because I think the first year it was won by oh, hang on. Maybe not. Because this year it was won by the Americans. No, the Australians, sorry.
Australians. Yeah.
Of course it was. So yeah, that was again an amazing crew that came over for that.
And we should we make? There's a few things on social media that came up. I know that we had. I can't remember who it was now. My apologies. But one of the tweets was around women's Henley, and is it Becky? Oh yeah, Olivia Bates setting the course record at Henley Women's Regatta this year for both lightweight and open weight singles. Was one of the social media highlights that we got. An MBE for Tom Dyson, the guy in charge of Britain's Paralympic rowing, and the dominance of British para squad. The survival of Ardingly Rowing Club despite our challenges with the erosion at the reservoir.
Ardingly, Crossy.
Ardingly,
You'll
sorry,
have
I get
Di
that. Yeah,
Binley. If you're listening, Di, please be noted that we're spreading the good word of Ardingly Rowing Club.
Ardingly. Okay, we must say that. Gordon Joyce, M. Gordon Joyce, the entire season of men's singles at world level, which we've talked a little bit about already. We're going to go on to talk about, I think. So we come there from Henley Regatta to Lucerne, which is always a kind of big sort of full stop after the racing season before crews go off to do their world championship preparation. And we had the British team there. I mean, maybe we should talk about the British team now, because it was the most sensational season for the British team. I think one of the things that struck me was, I know the Romanians weren't there, but the men's pair, they'd lost to New Zealand in the goblets, Ollie Wynne-Griffith and Tom George, but they came back and they looked fantastic at Lucerne, and they won the pairs event there.
Yeah, and that was again, I think a really tight race across the whole field. I remember I was at the 1,000-meter marker commentating at Lucerne, and that final came past me, and there was barely 2 or 3 lengths to separate the entire field at 1,000, which in a small boats race where you can gain that much with a final sprint, just proved it was going to be a great race. And yeah, they came in the pack to come through to be leading with 750 meters to go. Pretty amazing stuff. So yeah, I think that was the kind of, I know we'd seen big performances from the British at Belgrade, but we always talk about the lack of lots of big programs in Belgrade. The Netherlands didn't appear at Lucerne, so
Yeah,
again, where a lot of those silver and bronze medals by the Netherlands, the fact that they weren't at Lucerne maybe gave others opportunities, but
yeah,
still, the British, I think that was the kind of key moment to say, well, if you're doing well in Lucerne, we always use it as a really good benchmark from the World Cups as to who's on track to do well at the World Championships.
yeah. And then you had the likes of Graham Thomas, which was, I think, the last time a British sculler had won at Lucerne was maybe Tim Crooks back in the 70s. But he came through to win that event, which kind of, I think, was an amazing thing. And the men's 4 who'd lost to Australia by a foot, they were pretty dominant, I seem to recall, in the final of the men's 4 at Lucerne, beating the Australians by about a length or so.
and from the start, right? They just really went for it, and the Australians kept trying to come back at them, but they broke. I think it was clear water by halfway, and I think that. Oh no! Or maybe they did a good final sprint again, but this time they ended up on the right side of it. Actually, no, I think they were down at halfway. Sorry, my memory going. I was thinking about the World's final where they got up and got out, didn't they?
Yeah.
And just kind of led. Whereas at Lucerne, I think they tried to execute the same sprint that they did at Henley, but the course was 112 meters shorter, and their sprint was just that little bit quicker, and they ended up on the right side of the line.
And then the women's four from Britain. The women's four beat the Romanians: Long, McKellar, Redgrave, and Shorten. Looking fantastic. The women's quad went toe to toe with China with a sub on board, I think. Kyra Edwards was rowing in that boat ahead of, is it Lola Anderson who
Yeah,
probably
Lola
was?
Anderson got COVID, I think, just before they flew out. So it was, yeah, a sub from the start. And that was kind of the story of Lucerne. The Australian team was decimated, right, due to COVID. Same with the
Yeah.
Kiwis, who had all had it at Henley before coming to Lucerne. So again, I think that the Lucerne results usually are a very good indicator because everyone is trying to peak and everyone is at that same kind of um, uh, space in the cycle to perform. But when you've got COVID thrown into the mix and chopping and changing and subs on board, which there was for the majority of crews, or they were scratched, I don't think the results are maybe quite as good a teller as they were for the World Championships as they have been in previous years.
Yeah, one of the races that stood out for me, only because I happened to be at the finish, it was on the Saturday. It was the lightweight men's single sculls, and Paul O'Donovan, who'd been doing his medical studies through the year, he hadn't raced the double with Finton McCarthy, but he came down in the sprint for the line. He was at 50 plus. It was just, it was just amazing to watch. Yeah, I just, I don't know how he does it really. The whole.
Not to no spoilers, but I was chatting to Row 360 about a bit of a wrap up for the year on various things, at the racing and beyond, and kind of one of the posed questions was about kind of the strongest athlete in the world at the moment. And I think for me, Paul O'Donovan has just got to feature just with consistency, with the ability to, as you say, turn it on when it's needed. And he's one of these people that I think any boat that he is in, if he's there, he's going to do his damn best to win, right? And I
Yeah.
know that you kind of say that about everyone, but your gut tells you that he's going to do it in whatever the circumstances, and they'll do it in the lightweight double. He can do it in the single, and I just think he has to be one of the strongest athletes that's out there on the water at the moment to be able to produce that time and time again.
Yeah, and when I went to Skibbereen later on in the year, I found out talking to Fintan or to Dominic Casey, their coach, that they'd only been together in the double before the World Championships for about 10 days. Because of Paul's medical studies, and clearly they won that with a dominant display. They came together again. They just jumped in the double for the Europeans and won that. Beat the Italians. So he is, yeah. I think, is he the biggest athlete in world rowing at the moment, Paul O'Donovan? I remember Jean-Christophe Roland, the president of World Rowing at the Europeans. And Paul O'Donovan was up there, and one of the things that he wanted was to get a president, to get a selfie, I think, with Paul O'Donovan, which I think was kind of an indication, because he's the Olympic champion himself, Jean-Christophe Roland. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. He's starstruck with the Irish athlete. So Lucerne, I think we can move on to, is there anything in the Europeans that we haven't covered?
I think we've kind of talked about the men's single story. We've talked about the good successes for, I think three big programs. We've talked about the British, the Dutch, and the Romanians. I think the Romanians, you need to shout out at the Europeans for having a pretty amazing regatta. I know a lot of their funding depends on good performances at the Europeans, and they certainly delivered. So I hope that's paid off for them. And actually, I think it carried through somewhat to the Worlds, right? Especially thinking about like the Romanian women's squad. Ankuta, Bodnar and Simona Radic in the
Yeah.
double, the women's 8, Simona jumping into that women's 8, World Rowing Women's Career of the Year. The Romanians had a great season, but that all kind of stemmed from the Europeans, the first time we saw them. But I don't think we've really talked about the Greeks, and you talked a little bit
Oh,
about
yeah.
Scott, but the Greek sculling program, out of the four the four athletes they sent, I almost said lightweight because I think 4 out of the 4 of them either are lightweight or ex-lightweight. The 4 single scullers they had across the men's single, women's single, lightweight women's single, lightweight men's single, all came away with a medal. And I think that for a small program like Greece to have that sort of record at the European Championships, especially from a group of lightweights that are racing up.
Yeah.
What's their women's single sculler, who had just raced
Anastasiadou.
lightweight at the under 23s. Yeah, Evangelina Anastasiadou, who just, as I say, lightweight at under 23s, then come away with a silver medal at the Europeans in the open weight. Wow, that's another sort of discus story, isn't it?
Yeah, and I remember at the medal ceremony, it was so crazy because there was this tiny, relatively framed woman next to the lights of Alexandra Foster and Caroline Florine, and it did look crazy that she was there with the silver medal. Oh, one thing we didn't mention about Lucerne was Alexandra Foster.
As soon as you said that, I was like,
Yeah,
I know what, of course, he's going to mention here is that amazing sprint that came out of nowhere in the women's singles. That was dynamite, wasn't it?
yeah, it was complete dynamite, and it was a kind of get out of jail card for Germany, wasn't it, at the Europeans, where she got a bronze medal. Was that? Oh no, the para 4 got a silver medal or something, didn't it? I think that was Germany's only.
And the para single as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so they got the PR1 women's single, the PR3, 4, and then Alexandra Foster was the only Olympic category medal that they got rather than para.
I suppose one of the things I know, with the Antipodeans and maybe the Americans, it's not very, that the whole idea of having a European Championships in August is tremendously inconvenient for them and the way they like to train and prepare for the World Championships. But it was great to be part of a multi-sport event, I have to say.
Yeah, and I love them. I think it really links us in with the Olympic sport community. I think it's a really great way for rowing to stay relevant as part of the Olympic program. And one of the things, actually, whilst we're talking about multi-sport games, I suppose we should bring in at this point is coastals and beach sprints, which we'll talk about, I guess, a little bit later. But the fact that that's made it into a number of multi-sport games now, with the World Beach Games taking place in Bali next year, and then the Commonwealths over in Australia and Victoria in 2026. So again, I just think it's a really good indication, if you're part and parcel of those multi-sport events, for still contending within the Olympic Games, because the amount of times that we've heard about rowing being under threat, either through numbers or through the type of rowing and discipline that it might be, I think just having those multi-sport games and rowing still being one of those 10 sports that's included, say for instance in Munich, right, amongst swimming, climbing, athletics, whatever it might be, it just keeps us relevant, and I think we need to really focus on that.
Yeah, so we're on to the World Championships now, I think, after the Europeans. And you talked about the weather. I mean, the weather there was absolutely terrible for the first few days. It kind of wasn't like summer. It was at the end of summer, and all the Australians were going, told you so if you have an event, that late on. It was in September, wasn't it? and so the weather was pretty rubbish. The racing certainly wasn't rubbish. I can remember some fantastic racing even in the quarterfinals. I think the quarterfinals were better racing than the semi-finals overall for me. But I think big picture, the British team, amazing results from them. We haven't mentioned Louise Kingsley yet at all, the performance director of the British team. But I mean, what a season for her.
Yeah, what a first sort of full non-COVID season for Louise, and great results, across the board. Now, one thing I think, we need to be really cognizant of is that, it's a new program. There's lots of new coaches on board. Andrew Randall running the
Yeah,
women's side, Paul Stannard stepping up to more of that kind of lead head coach role on the men's side. And that sort of newness, I guess, sometimes sparks really big changes and really big results when it first gets implemented. But I think it will be really interesting to see on the run into Olympic qualification year how the British kind of continue that progress, and if they do, or whether it plateaus because they've become used to the training load, they've become used to the system, whatever that might look like. But also then how they run into a world championships with Olympic qualification places on the line, because back in Linz on the run up to Tokyo, there was a lot of changes within the crews that sort of I don't know whether it was kind of the sort of new method, old method, but it was more of a kind of leveler and qualify as many boats as possible, right? And there was a little bit of switch up to try and get all of those places, especially in the small boats, putting different combinations in the pairs, different combinations in the fours, in order to just try and spread your chances, spread your bets. Whereas we've got lots of really top performing crews in the events that we have boats in, but then there are some events we are just not contesting at all that are Olympic events. So the lightweight men's double,
yeah,
I, I don't think we're at the moment we have a crew that is able to do that. I'm not sure, just given the fact that we didn't really send a lightweight men's double to much this year, but we'll see. We've also not got a women's double at the moment, I think, that would end up in an Olympic qualifying spot, but I could be wrong. The
Kyra
men's double,
Edwards, Saskia Budget.
where did they finish overall though? Because if you think, we've only got 11 spaces in the women's
Yeah,
double.
I want to. Were they in the final? Did they just make the final? I can't remember.
I'm gonna have
My
a quick look.
apologies for that.
Second in the B final, so actually
Second in the
that's
B
completely
final.
my fault. So they
I
would
I
have
think as
qualified.
well. Saskia Budget was doing a medical studies, so they came into the double quite late. So you'd kind of think they'd have a better season this season, but
But then things like the men's double as well, by taking out George and Matt and putting them into the quad, do we have a men's double at the moment from the
no.
British side that could go to Paris? What do they do with those combinations that are meddling at the top end? Do you leave them as is, or do you try and play around to qualify as many spots as possible? So yeah, I think Louise has given herself a really nice problem as a performance director to say we've got loads of talent, but how do we, in an Olympic qualification year, spread that out to maximize our chances, and then hone it all back again in for
Yeah,
Paris.
I think you never know quite after watching a season, and like I think the British women's four had done so well. The British women's quad was so dominant at the Europeans, that I kind of said in commentary, I wonder where the Chinese would be in that race. And you thought, are they going to be competitive with the Chinese? The men's eight had such a fantastic season. I mean, all these crews delivered under pressure in the World Championships. And was Britain top nation in the medal table?
Yes, they were. The Yeah, which again is amazing that the majority of those medals came from either Olympic or Paralympic class events. And I think we must talk about the strength of the Paralympic British squad just being completely untouched, right? It's interesting to see that Lauren Rolls is back training.
Yeah,
I don't know whether we'll see Lawrence Whiteley back again. I'm not sure. But you know, without
I
a
think he's
partnership
retired.
there, yeah, without a partnership there, what will we see from the British team for each of those events? The PR1 singles, the PR2 mixed doubles, and then of course, you know, I think no questions about what we'll see in the fours. But yeah, there's maybe a couple of gaps, I guess, within the British side that might just open them up to a little bit of sort of contention in those categories, like the singles and the doubles on the para side, for the likes of like Ukraine, say for instance, to step in, because you know they picked up the Coach of the Year award for the lead Paralympic coach for Ukraine.
Yeah,
So yeah, lots of stuff
I
going on.
one thing about that, I would go back to Poznan because we had the emergence of Perini, the Italian, in the men's PR1 single sculls, and he kind of, I think, in the demonstration final, he did a sub 9, like 8:55 or something. And you've got this athlete that there's controversy about because people are saying, it's not the same category because he's a leg amputee just by the hip. But for me, one of the races of the season, certainly it's in my top 3, was the men's PR1 singles at the World Championships, where basically Perini led out. It was a bit of a headwind, I think, and Polanski, Roman Polanski, the Ukrainian Paralympic champion, tracked him the whole way. And basically, it was. I think I was going to give the race to Perini because he looked, but Polanski just held in there, and then just Perini cracked, and Polanski came through to take the gold. With
Polyansky's such a great racer, isn't he? Like,
Yeah,
I just think that despite sometimes his despite sometimes being really under pressure, so at the Tokyo Paralympics, where potentially there were chances for him to fall down, to continue to produce, you know, to the likes of Eric Horry and some of these emerging talents that are now coming through. I think that the consistency that he can produce in an A final is undoubtable. So yeah, amazing that he could do that with Perini, the Italian, hot on his heels. And I'm sure we'll see more from Perini, right? It's his first year of
yeah,
competition. He's only been in a boat for 12 months, I think, if that, really. So lots more progress to come. But Polyansky, yeah, amazing. And the race behind for the bronze as well, between Horry and Benjamin
Ben Pritchard.
Pritchard,
Yeah,
that was also just as close, right? Through the first kind of 1,200 meters of that race.
yeah. Should mention the French men's double scull. I think you asked quite a few people who's your crew of the championships, and they basically looked at the French men's double scull, Boucheron and Androdius, the Olympic champions, and they had such a funny season because they'd just been racing each other in singles through the season, and then they got into the double, but they looked fantastic. They looked so effortless. And then obviously to win that world title, that we've already spoken about, that the Croatians not delivering or coming in fourth place, but it was a beautiful thing to watch. Absolutely amazing, and I think thoroughly deserved crew of the year. And then I would another race that I would pick out and highlight, and it wasn't that it was particularly close at the finish, but Ollie Zeidler winning the men's single sculls after what had happened in Munich. I mean, what that guy had been through, not making the final in the 2019 2021 Olympic regatta after being world champion in 2019, and then missing out in Munich, and then coming through the regatta. I even did he lose to Twella in the semi-final? I can't quite remember. There was something.
A really good question, Crossy. And actually, I'm just going to have a quick look. No, so it was Borchon Duskos that lost to Twellar in their semi-final. He won his semi-final
If
ahead of
I
Graham Thomas, but only just by one
only
second.
just, yeah, it was kind of, but then in the final, he basically he just destroyed people, and it was amazing. And then at the finish, he just tapped his head there as if to talk about the psychology.
Uh, and I think the scariest thing about that was, I think certainly I was sitting on my sofa watching at home, for all of the World Championships, and the thing that really I was sat there going, is he just going to do exactly what he did in Munich? You know, every 500 meters
Yeah,
that went by, I just went, surely he can't keep this up. You know,
yeah, yeah,
surely
yeah,
not that much has changed since Munich. And he's taken the same tactic of get out, go hard, and people are going to start reeling him back in. And it just never happened, you know. And as soon as he got to that final 250, and he'd really opened up, you know, quite some space. It's remarkable, isn't it, that the same race plan and the same kind of tactic, I guess, had two completely different results, and one earned him a world championship title again. You know, a two-time world champion at the age he is in the single sculls is pretty amazing.
yeah,
But when given the context, even more incredible.
yeah. Florine getting her world championship gold medal. What an incredible season from her. I mean, she would have been up there in terms of crew of the year. I know the Romanian double won the crew of the year, but I think for a breakout season in a single, that was just sensational for her. Um, and I'm just trying to think. We've mentioned the lightweight women's double sculls. I think they were one of the crews of the regatta, the British lightweight women's double sculls, definitely. Uh, the American women, I think they won their heat in the eight and then didn't make a medal.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
you're right, Crossy, which was really surprising, wasn't it? They came fourth. The Canadians stepped back up to the plate after that sensational Tokyo season, you know,
yeah,
coming
yeah,
out of
yeah.
nowhere to win an Olympic gold medal. And I know a lot of that crew have kind of recycled, retired. You know, I think you've just got Kirsten Kitt in the Cox's seat, and then Sydney Payne back again, who was stroking that eight. But they've brought the double in. They've brought, you know, made a few changes, a few stepping up from under 23. But yeah, great to see the Canadians kind of
Mm,
continuing that momentum of women's sweep rowing, to another medal at the World Champs, where actually I don't think there was much else to report from the Canadians, or the
no,
Americans, like you say, other than their lightweight women's double. So yeah, a, a sort of top three that maybe I think the Aussies as well, finishing as low down as they did in fifth, may be surprising as well. And China,
yeah,
can't forget that China, of course, came out with that magnificent bronze in the women's eights in Tokyo. That they were right down in sixth. They've obviously not managed to keep up again the momentum that the Canadians
yeah,
have.
yeah. Really interesting. Shall we move on to the coastals? You were at the coastals, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. I love the coastals. I've done it for the last few years now, and it was a home coastals for me. I just had a quick trip down the M4, to Pembrokeshire. So we were in Saundersfoot in Wales. The first weekend was the sort of traditional coastals, the long distance coastal championships, and the second weekend was the beach sprints. I think probably best to focus maybe a bit more on the beach sprints, just given that
Mm,
that is an international, you know, selected event where you're selected to represent your country, whereas the coastal championships is more club based. You know, you represent your club, sort of as part and parcel of racing. Just a quick note to mention that the Spanish completely cleaned up at that. Really impressive performances, amazing stuff from them. But the beach sprints, are really kind of, a, a really amazing championships when it came to sort of contenders. We had like Emma Twigg and Helen Glover going up against
yeah.
each other in the women's singles, and Helen Glover, now interesting to see her back, in the trialing system for flat water too. You know, she made an appearance at the November trials in
Mm,
Boston and won that event. So I think we need to mention that as part and parcel of mentioning the coastals.
yeah.
And then, you know, on the men's side, we've got sort of emerging superstars within coastal, the likes of Chris Back, who won the men's single for the USA. You know, the US have ploughed a lot of resources into their coastal program, and they brought a full squad of juniors up through to kind of seniors too. And again, it really paid off in Chris Back, who's a sort of coastal specialist, coming away with a gold medal ahead of some of the sort of more well-versed flat water rowers, shall we say, the likes of Poland and a couple of others. So yeah, it's a great event, and I'm really excited to see where it can go. I would personally, and personal opinion, love to see it in LA. I think it would be fantastic on Long Beach. I think it would be a brilliant spectator event, and all those people that I think have sort of doubted, I guess, coastal rowing's place within the sport. I think I would encourage people to try going to watch an event if you've got something locally or you fancy a trip down to the beach. I think you'd be really surprised. And actually, listening to interviews from the likes of like Helen Glover, right, who's made that switch, and Emma Twigg, both saying that, it's a sport that is so different, but yet so challenging. And the weather, that's something I also must mention about the beach sprints. If we had like 50-mile-an-hour gusts coming against the tide, so the waves were just massive, breaking over the beach. We had people capsizing all over the place, trying to steer their lines back into shore and surf the waves. A totally different skill set, more akin to like sailing and reading the waves and letting the boat do the work for you than it is about overall strength. But I think that could really be an interesting sport for future.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So I think to wrap up, looking forward to 23 Olympic qualification year. Britain at the top of the pile. Had they peaked too early? Was 2022 a sort of slightly more easy year post Olympics? Slightly playing devil's advocate. It's going to be hard to say. People coming back in, the German 8 have got, athletes the like of Hannah Socek coming back in. Is that going to save them? Are they going to be up there to qualify that boat for the Olympics? Big question mark, I guess, over that. The athletes, I think, is it Annabelle McIntyre, the Australian Olympic champion, coming back, who was missing from that 4? Is that going to put them up head to head in terms of with Britain? The Chinese, the men's quad had a great early season, but then disappeared at the World Championship. Are they going to come back into it? Lots of things to look forward to.
Yeah, and also, things like Grace Prendergast retiring, that's going to open up a really big space in the women's pairs event, and I'll be so interested to see if that creates a sort of mass rush to people trying out the pair, maybe, where they may not be so dominant, and actually the rest of the field, I think, is kind of up for grabs, really. So lots of interesting chopping and changing, maybe more retirements, maybe more people coming back, like you say, after an post-Olympic break. So much to digest.
Well, I'm sure we'll be back to talk about the season, but I think we'll call that a wrap for now, unless you can think of anything else that we haven't mentioned.
I don't think so, Crossy. I think we've covered most of the kind of main international meets, and it's been great. Like, it's been good to kind of look at it all in a big picture, because I think sometimes we go and commentate on these races one by one. We do sort of individual wrap-ups one by one, but to look how the linkages between all the way back at the indoors and World Cup 1 through to the world champs and the coastals, great to see that kind of progression and how it all turned out.
So it's been lovely to chat through with you, Camilla, and we'll end the live part of this broadcast now. Thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. See more of you in 2023. Bye now.
Bye.